The space station was huge. It floated in the darkness between stars like a silver ring. Lights glowed from thousands of windows. Ships came and went every hour. This was the Unified Species Academy, the most famous school in the galaxy. For 300 years, young people from many worlds came here to learn. They studied war and peace. They learned how to lead armies and how to stop fights before they started. The best minds of 32 different species walked these halls. When they finished their studies, they became the leaders who shaped the future of all known space. Yuna walked through the main corridor with her bag over her shoulder. She was 24 years old, with black hair that fell past her shoulders and dark eyes that noticed everything. She was human, and that made her different from almost everyone else on the station. Humans were new to space travel. They had only discovered faster-than-light engines 40 years ago. Before that, they had been stuck on their single blue planet, looking up at the stars and wondering what was out there. Now they knew. The galaxy was full of life. Dozens of species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years before humans even learned to make fire. This made humans the newcomers, the beginners, the children of the galaxy. Yuna felt this every day. The other students looked at her with curious eyes. Some were kind about it. Others were not. She heard the whispers when she passed by. "There goes one of the primitives," they would say. How did they even get accepted here? There were only 6 humans at the academy. 6 out of over 10,000 students. Yuna knew all of them by name. They stuck together when they could, but their classes were different. So she often found herself alone among aliens. Today she was heading to Tactical Ethics 401. It was one of the hardest classes at the academy. Students learned about the rules of war. When was it right to fight? When was it wrong? What should a commander do when there were no good choices? These questions were not easy, and the instructor did not accept easy answers. The classroom was shaped like a bowl, with seats rising up in circles around a central stage. Yuna climbed to the back row and sat down. She liked it there. She could see everyone, and fewer people stared at her. The room filled slowly. A Venari female with wings like colored glass took a seat nearby. Her name was Talis, and she was one of the few aliens who spoke to Yuna without looking down at her. Behind Talis came a massive Morvik, his gray skin rough like stone. His name was Goran, and when he sat down, his chair groaned under his weight. More students arrived. A crystalline being named Illa floated to her seat, her body catching the light and throwing rainbows on the walls. 3 Deshans entered together, their blue scales shining, their forearms folded in the formal way of their people. Then Do-Yoon walked in, and Yuna felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Do-Yoon was human like her. He was 26, tall and thin, with a serious face that rarely smiled. He had been at the academy for 2 years longer than Yuna. He knew how things worked here, and he had helped her more times than she could count. He climbed up to the back row and sat beside her. "Ready for today?" he asked quietly. "Is anyone ever ready for Velos?" Yuna replied. Do-Yoon almost smiled. Almost. Commandant Velos was the instructor. He was Dyshan, one of the oldest species in the known galaxy. The Deshans had been building empires when humans were still living in caves. They were proud of this, and Velos was prouder than most. He entered the room exactly on time. His forearms were clasped behind his back. His face was calm, but his yellow eyes were sharp. He looked at the students the way a hunter looks at prey. "Today," he said, his voice filling the room without effort, "we will discuss the Koveth Principle." Yuna had read about this. Every student at the academy learned the Koveth Principle in their first year. It was considered one of the most important ideas in galactic military thinking. For those who need reminding, Velos continued, the Koveth Principle states that when civilian populations exist within a combat zone, The weaker force has a moral duty to surrender. Fighting on would only cause death that could be prevented. Surrender preserves life. This is the foundation of civilized warfare. The students nodded. This was accepted truth. This was what the elder races had agreed upon centuries ago. Velos walked slowly across the stage. His eyes moved over the students, studying them. Today, we will test this principle with a scenario. I want to see how you think. I want to see if you truly understand what the Koveth principle means. He stopped in the center of the stage. The scenario is this. You are the military commander of a colony world. 12 million people live under your protection. An enemy fleet has arrived in orbit. They are stronger than you. They have 3 ships for every one of yours. They demand your complete surrender. The room was silent. Everyone was listening. If you fight, Velo said, you will lose. Before you are defeated, approximately 4 million civilians will die. 4 million people who trusted you to keep them safe. If you surrender, the enemy will occupy your world. Your people will be ruled by outsiders. They will lose their freedom, but they will live. He spread his forearms wide. What is the correct response? Yuna felt Dohyun tense beside her. She felt her own heart begin to beat faster. She knew what answer the commandant wanted. She knew what answer every student in this room would give. But she also knew that the answer was wrong. The silence lasted only a moment. Then hands began to rise all around the room. Commandant Velos pointed to Talis. The Venere stood up, her wings folding neatly behind her back. Her voice was soft but clear. The answer is surrender, she said. The numbers make this obvious. If we fight, 4 million people die. If we surrender, everyone lives. How can anyone justify killing 4 million people when there is another choice? Velos nodded slowly. Go on. War should have rules, Talis continued. We are not animals. We do not fight until everyone is dead. When a battle cannot be won, a wise commander accepts this truth. Pride is not worth more than life. She sat down. Several students around her made sounds of agreement. Goran, the massive Morvik, raised his stone-like hand. Velos pointed to him. My people learned this lesson long ago, Goran rumbled. His voice was deep, like rocks grinding together. In the succession wars, we fought until our worlds burned. We killed billions of our own kind because we were too proud to stop. When the wars finally ended, we swore never to make that mistake again. He looked around the room with small, dark eyes. Surrender is not weakness. Surrender is wisdom. The Kovath principle saved my species from extinction. More nods. More sounds of agreement. Yuna watched the room carefully. Every face she could see showed the same certainty. This was obvious to them. This was simple truth. Illa, the crystalline being, spoke without being called upon. Light danced through her body as she moved. The mathematics cannot be argued with, she said. Her voice chimed like bells. 12 million alive is better than 8 million alive. Even a child can see this. Under occupation, there is hope, said one of the visions. Where there is life, there is possibility. The occupied can resist in small ways. They can wait for help. They can outlast their conquerors. But the dead wait for nothing. Exactly, said another student. Death is final. Occupation is temporary. Commandant Velos stood with his arms folded, his face showing nothing. But Yuna thought she saw something like satisfaction in his eyes. This was the answer he wanted. This was the lesson he had spent his life teaching. Then his gaze moved to the back of the room, to the seats where the 2 humans sat together. Cadet Yuna, he said, you have been very quiet. Yuna felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Some were curious. Some were dismissive. She was just a human, After all, what could she possibly add to this discussion? Beside her, Do-yoon leaned close. "Don't," he whispered. "It's not worth it. Just agree with them and move on." Yuna understood why he said this. She had been at the academy long enough to know how things worked. Humans who spoke up too often got labeled as troublemakers. They got harder assignments, harsher grading, fewer opportunities. It was better to stay quiet, do good work, and wait for acceptance. But she could not stay quiet. "Not about this." "Cadet Yuna," Velo said again, "does humanity agree with the consensus?" Yuna stood up. Her legs felt weak, but her voice was steady. "No, Commandant. Humanity does not agree." The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of agreement, but the sharp silence of surprise. Students turned in their seats to look at her. Some mouths hung open. Some eyes narrowed with annoyance. Talus looked confused. "You would choose to kill 4 million people?" "I did not say that," Yuna replied. "Then what are you saying?" Goran asked. His voice was not angry, but it was not friendly either. Velos raised one of his 4 hands. "Let her speak. I want to hear the human perspective on this matter." The way he said "human perspective" made Yuna's stomach tight. He was not interested in her ideas. He wanted to show the class what happened when primitive species tried to discuss advanced concepts. He wanted to make an example of her, but Yuna had faced worse than embarrassment. She had fought harder battles than this one. She stepped down from her row and walked toward the center of the room. With each step, she felt her confidence grow. These aliens thought they knew everything about war. They thought their 300 years of peace had taught them all the lessons worth learning. They were wrong. "The scenario is a trap," she said when she reached the stage. Not a trap set by the Commandant, but a trap in the thinking itself. You are all answering as if this is the only battle that will ever happen. As if this choice exists alone, with nothing before it and nothing after it. She turned to face the students. But that is not how war works. What you do in one battle tells your enemies what you will do in the next battle. And the battle after that. Velos tilted his head. It was the Veshan way of showing interest. "Explain." Yuna took a deep breath. "If you surrender every time an enemy threatens your civilians, you teach them that threatening civilians works. You give them a perfect weapon. Why build a bigger fleet when you can just point your guns at cities and demand whatever you want?" The room was very quiet now. But it was a different kind of quiet. Some students were actually thinking about her words. "The Kovath principle assumes that everyone plays by the same rules," Yuna continued. "But what about enemies who don't care about rules? What about enemies who see your surrender as an invitation to take more?" She looked directly at Commandant Velos. "What do you do then?" The question hung in the air like smoke after a fire. No one moved. No one spoke. Commandant Velos studied Yuna for a long moment. His yellow eyes were unreadable. Then he made a small gesture with one of his lower arms. "Continue," he said. "Tell us what you would do." Yuna nodded. She had hoped he would ask that. "I would fight," she said simply. Gasps came from around the room. Talus shook her head in disbelief. Goran made a low rumbling sound that might have been anger or surprise. "You would kill 4 million people," Illa said. Her crystalline voice was sharp now, like breaking glass. "For what? For pride?" "No," Yuna said firmly. "Not for pride. For the future." She began to pace slowly across the stage. Her boots made soft sounds on the floor. Every eye followed her. "Let me ask you something," she said. "In the scenario, we surrender. The enemy takes our world. They win without losing a single soldier. What lesson did they learn from this?" No one answered. "They learned that threatening civilians works," Yuna said. They learned that they can take whatever they want just by pointing guns at cities. So what do you think they do next? She stopped and looked at the class. They do it again. And again. And again. Every colony that cannot match their fleet strength becomes their property. Millions of people become slaves, not because they were conquered in battle, but because they surrendered before the battle even started. But they survive, Talus said. Her voice was uncertain now. Do they? Yuna asked. What kind of survival is that? Living under the boot of an enemy who knows you will never fight back. Who can take anything from you because you have already shown them you will not resist? She turned to face Commandant Velos directly. My people have a concept called deterrence. It means making the cost of attacking you so high that enemies decide it is not worth trying. You do not have to be strong enough to win. You only have to be strong enough to hurt them badly before you lose. Velos tilted his head again. And how does this apply to the scenario? If I fight, Yuna said, I will lose. The scenario makes that clear. But before I lose, I will make the enemy bleed. I will destroy their ships. I will kill their soldiers. I will make them pay for every meter of ground they take. Her voice grew stronger. And when the battle is over, when my world is fallen, the enemy will look at what it cost them. They will count their dead. They will repair their damaged ships. And they will remember. She held up one finger. The next time they approach a colony and demand surrender, they will think about what happened to them here. They will wonder if this colony will also fight. They will ask themselves if it is worth the cost. You cannot know that, Garn said. But his voice had changed. He sounded less certain than before. No, Yuna admitted. I can't know it for sure. But I know that surrender teaches nothing. Surrender only tells your enemies that you are easy prey. She looked around the room. My people have a saying. It goes like this. If you want peace, prepare for war. This sounds strange, I know. But the meaning is simple. An enemy who knows you will fight is less likely to attack you. An enemy who knows you will surrender is more likely to take everything you have. Ella floated closer to the stage. Light moved through her crystal body in complicated patterns. Your logic has a flaw, she said. In the scenario, 4 million people die if you fight. Real people. People with families and dreams and futures. You would take that from them to send a message? Those people would die to protect others, Yuna said quietly. Not just people on other worlds, but people on their own world too. Because an enemy who takes a planet without resistance does not suddenly become kind. They become greedy. They take more and more because no one stops them. She paused. I do not take this choice lightly. 4 million deaths is a terrible thing. But letting an enemy learn that threatening civilians works leads to far more than 4 million deaths in the end. The room was completely silent now. Students looked at each other with uncertain expressions. Some shook their heads. Others seemed to be thinking deeply. Dahyun stood up in the back row. His voice carried across the room. There is another word for what Yuna is describing, he said. In human military thinking, we call it costly signaling. The message you send is not that you can win. The message is that you will make any victory so expensive that it becomes a defeat. He walked down toward the stage, joining Yuna. A human general once said something famous, Do-hyun continued. He said that the supreme art of war is to win without fighting. But the only way to win without fighting is to make your enemies believe that fighting you would cost them too much. The door at the side of the room opened. A young woman walked in. Her name was Jizu, and she was another human student at the academy. Word had clearly spread about what was happening in this classroom. She came to stand with Yuna and Do-hyun. 3 humans, standing together on the stage, facing a room full of aliens who had been so certain they knew all the answers. We are not saying the Kovath principle is always wrong, Jisoo said. We are saying it is not always right. Sometimes surrender saves lives. But sometimes surrender costs more lives than it saves, just later instead of now. Commandant Velos had not moved during any of this. He stood with his forearms folded, watching everything with his sharp yellow eyes. Now he spoke. This is not the answer I expected, he said slowly. Commandant Velos walked slowly toward the three humans standing on his stage. His steps were measured. His face showed nothing. But something in his eyes had changed. You speak with great confidence, he said to Yuna. Your species has been traveling between stars for barely 40 years. What could you possibly know about war on a galactic scale? It was meant to be a challenge, perhaps even an insult. But Yuna did not flinch. You are right, Commandant, she said. We have only been in space for 40 years. But before that, we spent 10,000 years at war with ourselves. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. With a few touches, she activated the room's display system. A blue and green sphere appeared above the stage. It was Earth, her home world. This is where we came from, Yuna said. One planet, one species. And we almost destroyed ourselves more times than I can count. She zoomed in on the image. Scars became visible on the planet's surface. Areas of gray and brown where cities had once stood. 200 years before we reached the stars, we invented weapons that could end all life on our world. Nuclear weapons. We pointed them at each other and waited to see who would blink first. The room was completely silent. Students leaned forward in their seats. For 60 years, the two most powerful nations on Earth held the fate of everyone in their hands. Billions of people went to sleep each night, knowing that by morning, everything might be gone. She looked around the room. And do you know what stopped them from using those weapons? It was not kindness. It was not wisdom. It was fear. Fear? Talus asked. Fear of what the other side would do in response, Yuna explained. Both nations knew that if they attacked first, the other would attack back. Both would be destroyed. So neither attacked. We called it mutual assured destruction. She smiled, but there was no humor in it. It sounds insane, I know. We were holding knives to each other's throats for 60 years. But it worked. The weapons were never used in war. Billions of lives were saved, not by surrender, but by the promise of terrible consequences. Commandant Velos tilted his head. Your species survived by threatening each other with extinction? We survived by making the cost of war unacceptable, Yuna corrected. And this was not the only time. She changed the image. Now it showed a small peninsula on the eastern side of a large continent. This is Korea, she said. My homeland. For 5,000 years, my people lived here. We were surrounded by empires. Larger nations with bigger armies looked at us and saw easy prey. Yet you survived, Do-yoon added. 5,000 years of survival against enemies who should have crushed us. How? Goran asked. His earlier hostility was gone. Now he simply sounded curious. We fought, Yuna said. Every single time. When the Chinese came, we fought. When the Japanese came, we fought. When the Mongols swept across Asia and conquered everything in their path, we fought them too. She paused. We did not always win. Sometimes we lost badly. But we never surrendered easily. We made every conquest so painful that our enemies thought twice before trying again. Jisoo stepped forward. In the 20th century, Korea was divided in half. Two separate nations on one small peninsula. The North was supported by one great power. The South was supported by another. War broke out, and millions died. When the fighting stopped, Yuna continued. My half of Korea was surrounded by hostile powers. We were small. We were weak. By any logical measure, we should have been absorbed by our neighbors. But you are not, Illa said. Her voice had lost its sharp edge. No, Yuna agreed. Because we made it clear that taking us would cost more than we were worth. We built our military. We trained our people. We made alliances with distant powers. And we let our enemies know every single day that attacking us would hurt them badly. She looked at Commandant Velos. We call this the Porcupine Doctrine. Do you know what a porcupine is, Commandant? Velos shook his head. It is a small animal from Earth. Not very strong. Not very fast. But it is covered in sharp spines. Any predator that attacks a porcupine will win the fight, but it will regret trying. The spines cause pain that lasts long after the porcupine is dead. She spread her hands. Korea was a porcupine. We could not defeat our enemies in open battle, but we could make sure that anyone who attacked us would bleed. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then, to Yuna's surprise, Commandant Velos began to make a soft sound. It took her a moment to realize he was laughing. A porcupine, he said. Your species compares itself to a small, spiny animal. Yes, Yuna said. Because sometimes the small and spiny survive when the large and soft do not. Velos stopped laughing. He looked at her with something new in his eyes. It might have been respect. I have been teaching the Kovath principle for 130 years, he said slowly. In all that time, no student has ever challenged it so directly. He turned to face the class. Perhaps that is a problem. Perhaps we have become too comfortable with our answers. The door opened again. More people entered the room. Yuna recognized some of them. They were instructors from other departments, administrators, important people who did not normally attend basic classes. Word had spread. Everyone wanted to hear what the humans had to say, and Yuna realized, with a mixture of fear and hope, that this conversation was just beginning. The debate went on for hours. What had started as a simple class became something much bigger. More and more people arrived as the day went on. Instructors, students from other departments, even some high-ranking officials who normally never left their offices. The amphitheater filled completely. People stood in the aisles because there were no more seats. Others watched through the doors, straining to hear what was being said. Yuna answered every question, every challenge, every objection. Her voice grew tired, but she did not stop. What about the children? Someone asked. The 4 million who die in your scenario. Many of them would be children. How can you justify that? I do not justify it, Yuna replied. It is a tragedy. Every death in war is a tragedy. But the question is not whether those deaths are terrible. The question is whether surrendering prevents more deaths or causes more deaths in the long term. You cannot know the future, another voice called out. No, Yuna admitted, but I can learn from the past. And human history shows very clearly what happens when aggressive powers learn that threats work. She told them about other examples from Earth's history. She told them about Finland, a tiny nation that fought against a giant neighbor and bled them so badly that the invasion failed. She told them about Vietnam, a poor country that faced the most powerful military on Earth and refused to break. These were not victories in the traditional sense, she explained. Finland lost land. Vietnam lost millions of people. But they both survived. They both remained free, because they showed their enemies that conquering them would cost more than it was worth. Daehin spoke about game theory. He explained how choices that seem wrong in a single situation become right when you consider the bigger picture. If you play a game once, then making a sacrifice to hurt your opponent seems foolish, he said. But if you play the same game many times, against many opponents, then building a reputation matters. An opponent who knows you will sacrifice to hurt them is less likely to attack you in the first place. Jisoo talked about psychology. She explained how humans had learned, through bitter experience, that appearing weak invited attack. There is something in all thinking beings that responds to strength, she said. Not cruelty, not aggression, but the clear signal that you will defend yourself. When that signal is missing, predators take notice. As the hours passed, the mood in the room began to change. The certainty that had filled the alien faces at the start of the day slowly faded. In its place came doubt. And then, in some faces, understanding. Commandant Velos stood at the edge of the stage, watching and listening. He rarely spoke now, but when he did, his questions were no longer challenges. They were genuine attempts to understand. You are suggesting, he said at one point, that our centuries of peace may have taught us the wrong lessons. I am suggesting that peace has different sources, Yuna replied. Some peace comes from understanding and cooperation. That kind of peace is strong and good. But some peace comes from fear of consequences. That kind of peace requires maintenance. And if you stop maintaining it, then those who do not share your values will take advantage. The sun outside the station's windows set and rose again. The debate continued. Food was brought in. No one left. Finally, near the end of the second day, Commandant Velos raised all 4 of his arms. The room fell silent. For 300 years, he said, the Kovath Principle has been the foundation of our military ethics. It has shaped how we think about war and peace. It has saved countless lives. He paused. His yellow eyes moved across the room, taking in every face. But perhaps it has also made us blind. Blind to enemies who do not share our values. Blind to the possibility that our kindness could be seen as weakness. He looked at Yuna. I do not know if you are right, human. I do not know if your way is better than ours. But I know that we have stopped asking questions. We have become so certain of our answers that we forgot how to doubt. He turned to face the assembled crowd. That will change. Starting today, the Academy will review its core teachings. We will examine our assumptions. We will consider perspectives we have ignored. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was unprecedented. The Unified Species Academy had not changed its basic teachings in over 100 years. The human doctrines, Velos continued, will be added to our curriculum. Not as truth, but as a different way of seeing. A reminder that there is more than one path to survival. 1 year later, everything was different. The new teachings spread beyond the Academy. Military leaders across the galaxy began to rethink their strategies. Colonies that had always relied on the Kovath Principle started building defenses, training militias, preparing to fight if necessary. And then the test came. The Harris Dominion emerged from unexplored space with a massive fleet. They were not interested in trade or friendship. They wanted conquest. Their first demands came to a colony of 8 million souls. Surrender or die, they said. Just like in the old scenario. But this time, the answer was different. The colony did not surrender. Neither did the next one or the one after that. Fleets gathered. Alliances formed. Species that had barely spoken to each other for centuries stood together. The message to the Harith was simple. You may be strong, but we will not roll over. We will not make it easy. If you want what we have, you will pay for it in blood. The Harith looked at the forces arrayed against them. They counted the ships. They calculated the costs. And they turned around. The invasion never happened. In the histories written later, scholars would mark the day that Yuna stood up in Commandant Velos's classroom as the beginning of a new era. They called it the Second Galactic Reformation. The day the galaxy learned that peace was not something you wished for, but something you earned. The day the galaxy learned to show its teeth. And in the Academy's Hall of Honor, beside the names of great leaders and thinkers from dozens of species. A new name was carved, Una of Earth, the human who changed everything. She was 30 years old when they added her name to the wall. She stood before it with Doyun on one side and Jisoo on the other. Commandant Velos stood behind them, his forearms crossed in the Deshan gesture of deep respect. "Do you regret anything?" Velos asked her. Una thought about the question. She thought about the fear she had felt standing in that classroom. She thought about the certainty that she was going to be mocked and dismissed. "No," she said finally. "I spoke the truth as I understood it. That is all any of us can do." Velos made the laughing sound again. "Your species," he said, "continues to surprise me." "Get used to it," Una replied with a small smile. "We are just getting started." And somewhere out in the dark between stars, the enemies of peace looked at the galaxy and saw something new. Something they had not expected from these strange, short-lived creatures who had only just learned to fly. They saw teeth, and they were afraid.